They were never supposed to find the basement. Not the authorities, not the neighbors, not even time itself. But in the summer of 1834, in the rural outskirts of Loudoun County, Virginia, under the rotting floorboards of the Sullivan estate, the scent of something ancient and wrong rose from the earth, and what they uncovered rewrote everything we thought we knew about early America. 47 children, emaciated, chained, silenced, some were dead, some wished they were. No birth records, no school logs, no missing persons reports, just numbers branded on their wrists, and strange marks on their tongues, as if language itself had been torn away. The house stood like a wound in the landscape, a three-story colonial facade hiding something far older beneath. Witnesses said it felt alive, like it watched you, like it breathed. The Sullivan family claimed devout Christian roots, respected, wealthy landowners, but their wealth didn't come from crops, and their religion didn't come from any god you'd recognize. Local legends spoke of secret gatherings at midnight, hooded figures, chanting in dead dialects, screams swallowed by the forest. And yet, no one asked questions, because in 1834, the line between fear and obedience was razor thin. But this isn't just about the savants, this is about the machinery beneath history, the hidden gears that still turn today. You see, what was found in that basement, the chains, the blood-soaked altar, the mirror etched with Latin and Greek backwards, wasn't meant for torture. It was meant for conditioning, programming. These children weren't just victims, they were vessels, carriers of something passed down. What if I told you the Sullivan house was only one node in a larger design, a quiet, intergenerational network of psychological experiments, cloaked in family, in faith, in flags? You've been taught to forget, but you're here now, and once we descend, there is no return. You wanted truth. Now take my hand, and I'll show you where the shadows really begin. They called it the Foundation. Not in public, of course. No, this name was whispered through folded letters, etched into the underside of pews, stitched into the lining of coats, passed between men at elite schools. And it began long before 1834. The Sullivan property was built on land once used by pre-colonial secret orders native societies that vanished, not by genocide, but by absorption. Their rites, their glyphs, their methods of mind manipulation taken, twisted, hidden beneath layers of Christian theater. By the time the Sullivans arrived in Virginia, they weren't settlers, they were caretakers, sent to maintain a site of spiritual engineering. It was never about land, it was about leverage over the human mind. In that basement, authorities found journals written in code. It took decades before historians began to crack them. What they revealed wasn't a religion, it was a system. A psychological blueprint for breaking identity and reassembling it into something, obedient. The children were taken young, yes, but not at random. Birth dates aligned with eclipses, lineages traced to ancient bloodlines, all with one thing in common: susceptibility to trance states. They were broken, not with pain, but with rituals of silence, darkness, and repetition. Each child was given a symbol, then stripped of their name, then taught to fear freedom more than chains. This wasn't abuse for sadism, it was precision. Think deeper, this wasn't just an isolated house of horror. This was early MK programming, long before it had a name. Before the CIA, before Project Artichoke, before MK Ultra, this was the prototype. The Sullivan journals spoke of creating men without will, children molded to serve, obey, disappear, and re-emerge decades later, placed like pawns into new systems of control: teachers, bankers, lawmakers, carriers of a silent code. Now pause and ask yourself, why is this not in your textbooks? Because the victors didn't just write history, they edited memory, and every man who gets too close to the original story either disappears or goes mad. You wanted the truth. You've only seen the first page. Now let's open the next. This is where things begin to bleed. In 1841, 7 years after the Sullivan discovery, a series of anonymous letters reached the U.S. War Department. They warned of a contagion of mind, spreading through orphanages, seminaries, and plantation schools across the South. The language was clinical, but the message was spiritual, psychological. The letters described young boys suddenly going silent, girls who awoke speaking languages they'd never learned, children who didn't remember their parents but remembered symbols, carvings, rhythms, patterns. This wasn't abuse in the traditional sense. It was installation, installing scripts, reflexes, ideologies into the developing human soul, so deeply that not even time could erase them. The Sullivan method had spread, and behind it wasn't just a family, it was a council. 7 bloodlines, all traced back to old world nobilities, some say even farther, to Rome, to Babylon, to Egypt's priest-kings who built power not through armies, but through belief management. These 7 families formed what the coded documents called the spiral, a layered architecture of control not with chains, but with language, story, and ritual repetition. They believed the human mind was a temple you could redesign, brick by brick, so they created hymns that weren't prayers, they were commands. They wrote fairy tales that weren't stories, they were maps. They built churches that weren't sacred, they were devices. And they placed these artifacts in front of us as children, while we were still soft, still programmable. You think the nursery rhymes, the prayers, the school pledges were random. No, they were activation keys. Do you understand? This is why you feel a strange chill when you hear that old hymn. This is why you feel a strange chill when you hear that old hymn. Why the national anthem moves something in you don't fully recognize. Because they programmed your grandfather. And your grandfather's father. The Sullivan children were just the first wave. You were born into the second. And until now, you didn't even know you were in a system. But you do now. And once you see it, truly see, it too can never go back. The descent continues. But the question is, let me ask you something brutal. Why do you remember your school anthem but not the face of your great-grandmother? Why can you recite a national slogan but forget the voice of your first dream? Memory isn't broken, it's redirected. You were taught to memorize what served the system and forget what served you. And this didn't start in your lifetime. It started in places like the Sullivan house, because once the spiral families proved they could override identity, they began testing larger audiences. The Civil War. That was more than conflict, it was a psychological reset. 2 groups, 1 flag, 1 narrative, and underneath it all, test zones, controlled environments, entire counties where schools were funded not by government but by shadow trusts, curriculums altered, religious texts rewritten, and always a Sullivan method disciple placed at the helm, sometimes a preacher, sometimes a doctor, sometimes a teacher with no past and eyes like winter. These people weren't there to educate, they were there to condition. To refine what the foundation called the 6 breaks, a series of emotional shatters, designed to fracture a growing mind into segments. 1 part that obeys, 1 part that forgets, 1 part that watches, and the remaining parts buried until activated. This is why, even now, grown men walk through life dissociated, empty, angry, addicted, searching, not realizing. They were fractured by design. You were never broken, you were divided. You were the result of an experiment, centuries in motion, and still, the average man thinks he's free. Freedom was rebranded, turned into a flag, a sports team, a credit score. Real freedom, the ability to unplug from the narrative, was hidden behind shame, fear, and humiliation. And that's where we're going next. But first, if you're still here, if this is cutting into you the way I know it is, I want you to write this in the comments. I remember the fracture. I remember the fracture. Not for the algorithm, but to claim back what they divided. Now breathe. We go deeper. There's a room beneath the Library of Congress. You won't find it on any official map. But it's there, sealed behind a steel hatch, accessible only through a maintenance elevator that descends 7 levels down. The architects who built it, all dead. The records of its funding, scrubbed. Inside that room are shelved stone, not wood-lined with documents never meant for human eyes. Among them, a complete transcript of the Sullivan experiments. Bound in black leather, marked with a single phrase on the spine. The anima machina. The soul machine. You think this is myth? No, this is infrastructure. The founders didn't just write a constitution. They wrote a psychological operating system crafted through experiments like the Sullivans, reinforced through media, reinforced through trauma. That's why every major crisis in history is accompanied by a unifying slogan, a repeated phrase, a collective trauma followed by collective suggestion. It's not coincidence, it's induction. Because the human mind in crisis is programmable. Look back, 9/11s, a tragedy, yes. But what came next? Endless footage, the same scenes repeated until they became ritual. Followed by the phrase, never forget. And yet, what do you forget? That it was followed by mass surveillance, wars of profit, the passing of freedom for the illusion of safety, trauma, suggestion, submission. Now you see the pattern. It's not new. The Sullivan children weren't simply tortured, they were placed under constant sensory overload, then offered a false savior, someone who fed them, soothed them, became their god. And from that day forward, they would defend him, even love him, even if he was the one who broke them. Sound familiar? This is how entire populations fall in love with their captors. This is why you vote for leaders who poison your air, why you consume media that mocks your instincts, why you feel rage when someone questions the system even if you agree with them deep down. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility now, because now you see the strings, and those who see must choose. Break the program. Or live the rest of your life pretending the chain around your mind was just decoration. Let's keep going. The darkest part is still to come. In 1903, a child named Enoch Ray was found wandering the Appalachian woods, naked, bleeding, covered in sigils carved into his skin. He spoke no English, no known language, but he drew over and over the same symbol found on the basement walls of the Sullivan estate, a spiral over a black sun. Authorities buried the case, said he was feral, sent him to an asylum. But Enoch never screamed, he sang. Not songs, codes, the same 12 tones used in ancient Mesopotamian rituals. The same tonal patterns found in the Gregorian chants traced back to the cults of Mithras and buried in those frequencies. Commands. This is the technology you've never been told exists. Sound. Used not for healing, but for enslavement. The spiral families learned early. Words fade, books burn, but frequency vibration remains. That's why they embedded tones into school bells, national anthems, radio jingles. Why the Sullivan children were made to chant every morning before being shocked. They weren't punished, they were being tuned. Their trauma wasn't accidental. It was ritual calibration. Now ask yourself, why do you get goosebumps when a certain chord plays? Why do you feel comfort hearing the same advertisement voice you've heard since you were 10? Why do you still hum songs you hate? You've been tuned, and you've passed that frequency on without even knowing it. This is generational programming. Psychic software. You were never meant to hear this. Never meant to understand this. But now, you do. And the moment you hear the truth in these words, something ancient inside you begins to awaken. That's why this video feels dangerous. Because it's real. And somewhere, deep in your nervous system, a part of you remembers the basement, the silence, the spiral. You don't know how, but you know it's true. And once the body remembers, the mind follows. This is not conspiracy. This is construction. And now, we go where few have dared. Not into history, but into the present. They never stopped. You think the Sullivan legacy ended in the 1800s? No, it evolved. It became corporate. In 1947, the Sullivan descendants reappeared under a new name. The Keywell Group, a philanthropic foundation offering educational reform across South America, Eastern Europe, and quietly, Brazil. They donated to schools, built research labs, sponsored children's hospitals. But behind every smiling press photo was the same agenda. Behavioral design. In 1952, Keywell partnered with a new U.S. agency, one without official charter, Division D, the internal term, the Shepherd Branch. Its goal: find those with ancestral susceptibility to control, the broken lineage, not just orphans, not just the poor, men, women, children, anyone whose blood carried trauma that could be reactivated. The test wasn't physical. It was psychological. They monitored reactions to media, responses to authority, eye movements during national speeches, and when they found the right profile, they invited them in. Scholarships, promotions, mentorship programs, and inside those doors, the ritual continued. No altars, no chains, but silence, isolation, endless hours of light, then sudden dark, complex tones, flash images, praise, then ridicule, over and over, until the soul fractured, and once again, they installed obedience. Only this time, the subjects weren't locked in basements. They were placed in offices, on stages, in government, carriers of calm destruction, men who could smile as they signed your freedom away. And still, no one noticed, because the method had matured. From shackles to screens, from bloodlines to algorithms, and you were raised in its shadow. Your phone, your television, your education. It all follows the same design. Create dissonance, trigger fear, offer relief, repeat. The Sullivan children were prototypes. You are the product. And if you think this ends with you, it doesn't. Because now, you are the transmitter. Your choices echo into your bloodline. And the question is, will you continue the ritual, or break it? You already know the answer. But answering it will cost you everything. Are you willing? Then come. We're nearly at the heart. They call it the quiet cathedral. It's not a place. Not exactly. It's a system, a global structure hidden in the open, disguised as progress, philanthropy, modern life. Every time you fill out a government form, swipe your ID, accept a new policy without reading it or entering the cathedral, and inside it are priests who wear no robes, who preach no gospel, but who control everything you believe to be real. Media moguls, behavioral scientists, curriculum architects, social engineers. You've seen them on stages, smiling, winning awards. You thought they were geniuses, but they're operators, caretakers of a system designed not to free you, but to predict you. To keep you one step behind your own awakening. This is the new Sullivan method. No more chains, no more sellers, just endless data. Collected, tracked, fed into predictive algorithms that know your fears before you do. They don't need to imprison your body. They've caged your mind. And the bars are made of convenience, comfort, distraction. That's why you struggle to focus. Why you reach for your phone even when you don't want to. Why your dreams feel less like visions and more like code unraveling. Because your attention has been colonized. And when a man's attention is not his own, neither is his destiny. But there's a reason you're still watching this. Somewhere inside you, something ancient stirs. Something the system couldn't erase. The part of you that remembers the fracture. The part that resists, that watches, that waits. You are not broken. You are divided. And now, piece by piece, you are becoming whole again. But it won't be easy. They will mock this message, bury it, call it madness. Because if even a few men awaken, the system begins to crack. And from that crack, the world changes. Forever. So look in the mirror tonight. Ask yourself one question. Who built the man I've become, and who must I now become to destroy him? Ready for the final descent? Let's rip the veil. Now we reach the origin. Before the Sullivan is, before the spiral. Before the masks of civilization cloaked it all in false light. It began with the Templum Obscura, the Dark Temple, a pre-Christian order, not a cult, not a church, but an intelligence project, carried through bloodlines whose names were erased from history and replaced with those you're meant to worship. Caesar, Constantine, Columbus, Washington. All masks. The true architects. Never seen, never praised. Because their power came from silence. Their doctrine was simple. The soul is programmable. The body is the vessel. And the world, is the classroom. They didn't rule by sword. They ruled by symbol. Every empire they touched bore their mark, spirals, eyes, suns swallowed in black. They seated themselves inside Rome, then into the Vatican, from there, into royal courts, then secret lodges, then eventually into think tanks and tech companies. It was never about gods, it was about control through belief. They understood something we've forgotten, that language shapes perception, and perception shapes reality. That's why the Sullivan children weren't just physically chained, they were linguistically shackled. Their minds rewired with scripts written, not in sentences, but in meaningless repetition. They were trained to respond to certain phrases, like keys, turning locks. And today, that system has gone digital. You scroll past it every day. You call it content. But what if I told you 93% of what you see online isn't random? It's sequenced, designed to pacify, provoke, seduce, distract until your identity is no longer yours. You're not you. You're a compilation of reactions to symbols injected by strangers, and they count on you never realizing it. But you're here now. You're watching this, hearing my voice, and something in your bones knows. The story of the Sullivan children isn't just a horror tale, it's your origin story. And once you claim it, the cathedral shakes. The spell begins to break. One section remains, and in it, you will face the mirror and choose your role in what comes next. This is where it ends and begins. Not in the shadows of an old Virginia basement, not in dusty archives or forgotten symbols, but inside you. The final lie they fed you wasn't that the Sullivan family was an isolated evil, it was that you could do nothing about it, that you were just one man, powerless, outnumbered, silenced by the weight of the world. But here's what they never calculated. Awareness is a virus, and once it enters the bloodstream of a man who refuses to bow, it begins to multiply. It becomes clarity. It becomes fire. You were born into a ritual, conditioned since birth to obey systems you never chose. But now you have seen the blueprint. The fracture isn't just in the system, it's in you. And now you hold the tools to rebuild yourself not in their image, but in the one they fear. A man with vision, a man with memory, a man who no longer confuses peace with submission. You feel it now, don't you? The hum beneath your skin, the crackle in the silence between words. That's the programming breaking, and once it's gone, they lose everything. Because their power never came from force. It came from your agreement, your silence, your fear. Withdraw that tan, they collapse. The Sullivan house still stands, hidden, boarded, but breathing. Some say the walls whisper at night. Some say the mirrors bleed. But I say this, that house lives in all of us. And now, you have the match, so burn it. Let the ritual end with you. Stand, awaken, speak. And if you do, if even a handful of men remember who they truly are, then the spiral folds, the cathedral cracks, and the next generation won't be born into chains, but into fire. If you made it this far, you are the resistance. Type it below. I am the fire. I am the fire. Twice, not for comments. For ignition, the algorithm watches. But so do the architects. Let them see us now. Let them feel what they built. Tear itself apart. If you want more stories the world tried to erase. If you're hungry for the forbidden, the dangerous, the real, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with one man brave enough to remember. Until next time, this was the Black Ledger, where forgotten truths rise, and obedience comes to burn.